Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee, Wednesday the 14th of October. Just a couple of housekeeping things for me to read out before we start the business of the meeting. May I remind everyone present that the meeting will be recorded via the internet, and this recording is archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen or on screen, or use the chat function that's available in the box on the side, please. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, they should let the chairman or the democratic officer know. And if they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so that at least they can be heard, can hear and be heard. Thank you. If we can go first, any apologies for absence, please, Mark?
Yes, we do have some, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Collins, Mrs. W. Davis, Mrs. G. Doyle, and Mr. A. Raybould from the tenant representatives.
Thank you, Mark. So if we move now to item 2, minutes of meeting held on the 16th of September 2020. Are there any people happy to move the minutes, or are there any items that they want to discuss? Happy to move? Okay, thank you. We now, any declarations of interest, please? No declarations of interest from anybody? Okay, so item number 4 is for reference. This is the coronavirus recovery strategy that went to Cabinet on the 21st of September 2020. I think this evening it just gives us the opportunity to ask more questions around it. We have Mike Ingram here at the moment, one of the officers, but we also will have Marcus Goldsworthy with us at about 6:30. So if you have any questions around sort of items that you might want to ask him, if you could hold those questions for when he's available to join our meeting. Is that okay? Yeah. Mike, would you like to lead on this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report that was presented to Cabinet, as you can see from your papers, was drafted around the 14th of September. I suppose I don't need to necessarily highlight the fact that things have moved forward somewhat in the last 4 weeks. And the report does identify that the recovery strategy is flexible and has to be flexible enough to deal with changes of circumstances, and clearly I think we're in one of those, and we certainly from media understand that we may be flexing even further in the next few weeks. The reports have been produced during the coronavirus pandemic, and they're attached to the report, but I suppose the most important appendix is that attached to Appendix A, which is the recovery strategy in itself. Key issues for consideration with regard to that strategic report. It's structured around the Council's 3-phase approach to the management of the pandemic. So phase of response, transition and recovery. And those structures, those approaches have been operating in parallel over the last few months, certainly through the summer, as we've moved from response, which was actively looking at how to maintain the R rate as low as possible, but to continue to provide essential services, and moving then in the short to medium term, looking as we moved out of response into transition. as I mentioned, those things have been running in parallel, and different directorates and different departments would have been at different stages within that response and transition phase, depending on the types of services that they provided. The recovery strategy, as I mentioned, has a structured response. Response specifically was dealing with the initial phases of the pandemic, and as part of that work there was output from learning exercises with members, with chief officers and with the public and staff around how we shared experiences of how we went through that initial phase, and that has helped form some of the strategic responses that you will see in the attached document. Transition, as I've mentioned, is how we've gone from the immediate response and how we've established cross-directorate working groups to understand the issues that we've been presented with, and the opportunities and the learning as part of that work. And then finally, recovery, which and I think this is very important, that recovery isn't return to pre-coronavirus and pandemic. This is about taking some of that learning, some of the opportunities, understanding the threats that have been identified over the last 6 months, and changing the way that this organisation delivers its services. And the report identifies some of those threats and opportunities in a recovery action plan. The work has also been informed by a number of external pieces of work, the community impact assessment, together with an economic impact assessment. And the learning and the threats and opportunities have formed, as I say, an action plan which links with the Council's 4 wellbeing objectives. And you can see those from page 41 of the appendix onwards. In pursuing the recovery priorities, obviously decisions will need to be taken in light of the resources available to the Council and the demands of those services. And the report also identifies opportunities in terms of those resourcing requirements. And as has been mentioned previously, with larger numbers of staff working from home and likely to continue to work from home as part of the positive experience that we've gone through, opportunities looking at the Council's estate, looking at efficiencies and the way that we will continue to respond to the pandemic as we go forward. What the report also indicates is the importance of involving, engaging and consulting with our residents, staff and partners as we move forward. It's acknowledged that autumn and winter was going and is going to be a difficult period, and the requirement to continue to engage and develop our recovery plans as we move forward. But equally, as I say, the report also acknowledges the fact that those recovery plans will be affected by a range of external influences. And clearly, whilst the report is only a month old, I'm sure that Cabinet and the Council will be needing to consider our move potentially back into response as the R rate increases and the numbers of people with COVID-19 increases as well. So the report recommends that Cabinet consider the strategy and that it be referred to all of the scrutiny committees. The reason for referral to scrutiny is to ensure that that those priorities, the 19 priorities that are identified, as I say, from page 41 onwards in the report, that are monitored and scrutinised by those scrutiny committees, but also inform your work programme going forward. If members are happy, if I can take you through page 41 of the report onwards, specifically to look at some of the issues that in terms of those priorities and how they're going to impact on the work of this scrutiny committee. Now, clearly, it could be argued that all of the priorities, to a certain extent, do impact on homes and safe communities. But the key ones, as I see them, as I say, I'll lead you through those now, if I may. So if we look at the first, to support learning, employment and sustainable economic growth at page 41, moving down the page then to the strategic recovery priorities. Priorities 4 and 5 specifically, there is a potential focus for us as a committee.
We're just looking for page 41 at the moment. We go over to
Sorry, page 41 of Appendix A.
I think, Mike, mine only goes up to page 40.
Yeah, I've only got up to page 40.
I think if you look on the online version, it's there.
I'm in this meeting, so I'm not clever enough to do that.
My apologies, for some reason it's not gone on the hard copies then. So apologies to members about that, but I'll have a look into that.
Mark, is it possible to share the screen?
Yeah, bear with me. I'll just bring that up if everyone can hold on, and I'll present it to the screen to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
I've just put it in the chat if that helps.
Have members been able to open the link in the chat?
I'll present it as well, Mike.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through it now, Mike.
Hopefully that's come up for everyone.
Yeah.
So what page was it? Sorry, Mike, 41.
Page 41.
Right, okay. And what was the title?
So to support learning, employment and sustainable economic growth, I believe. That's it. So as you can see from page 41 onwards, it talks about the threats and opportunities that are aligned to the council's corporate plan. So one of our wellbeing objectives is to support learning, employment, sustainable economic growth. And as you can see, there are a number of threats and opportunities there related to those recovery themes. On page 42 of that Mike, report,
So I do apologize, Mike. If people do have hard copies, on the hard copy, on the presentation stroke appendix, this is on page 31. Apology for the renumbering, but if you haven't got that, I'll keep this up anyway as a reference point. Sorry, Mike.
Sorry. So if you look at page 42 under the heading Strategic Recovery Priorities, at the bottom of that page, you'll see that there are 5 priorities on that page. And I would highlight priorities 4 and 5 as being areas that this committee has an influence on. So just to highlight what I mean by that, priority 4, take action to promote green recovery, refocus the capital programme to support economic growth. Clearly, the council has an ambitious new build programme. One of the areas that we are focusing on is the use of sustainable materials and technologies, and we're looking at modern methods of construction. And clearly, an area there that we can contribute to this priority is through that programme of work. We're also looking to undertake a pilot programme with the support of Welsh Government to look at alternative technologies for heating our homes. So we've at the moment bid for some capital funding with Welsh Government to install ground source heat pumps in a small number of our properties, and then to monitor that to understand how tenants can use the technology, but being more importantly, to look at issues around fuel poverty and the impact on fuel poverty as well. So an area of focus might be for this scrutiny committee to look at the capital programme and to consider how the work that we're doing is contributing to that activity. Number 5, I would suggest that we also have a responsibility for, in addition to other areas of the council activity, about supporting key businesses. Clearly, with a housing investment programme, just in terms of the capital investment, over the next 30 years, the housing business plan looks to contribute £660 million in improving the council housing stock, together with new build and regeneration activity. Over the next 5 years, we're looking to spend about £120 million on investment in the council stock. So clearly, we have a potential as a key driver to support opportunities, both in terms of new technology and how we build our homes, and the skills required to build them. But we also have the influence to financially support local SMEs within the Vale of Glamorgan and support them to take on some of the work that capital programme is driving. So perhaps an area might be, again, you might want to understand or to see a report perhaps that looks at how we're going to achieve that, and what is the strategy for us to improve the way that we procure and engage with local businesses and those communities. Moving on to the next wellbeing priority, to support people at home and in their community. Well, this is your bread and butter, isn't it, as a scrutiny committee? And obviously the sort of main priority, I suppose, of my service and the committee is looking at the whole issue of homelessness and how that has been impacted upon during the crisis. Clearly, there's always been a strategic policy aim that, you know, most local authorities, and the driver is to try and eradicate homelessness as far as possible. What the pandemic has shown us, I suppose, in a very short period of time, that the work that we have done, I wouldn't for 1 minute suggest that we have eradicated homelessness in the Vale, but what we've been able to do is to ensure that any homeless person or any person that is a threat to homelessness is provided with some form of accommodation. The accommodation that we have provided is obviously temporary in nature for 60 or 70 residents, because we place them in hotel and bed and breakfast accommodation. And at some stage, as the economy improves and those businesses, those hotel businesses clearly potentially look for business elsewhere, there will be pressure on that temporary accommodation resource going forward. Welsh Government have indicated that they don't see that that the gains that have been made in trying to deal with the situation, they don't see that once the pandemic is over, or under control, let's put it that way, of reverting back to previous circumstances whereby the vast majority of those people that we've picked up in the last 6 months, in the main single people, and for whom the local authority in the past may not have had a statutory responsibility for, Welsh Government have indicated that they have no intention of going back to situations where street homelessness is on the rise. Now that has some long-term implications for us, because at the moment the problem that we have is that we have over 200 people in temporary accommodation. The problem that we have is moving those people into permanent homes. And the work that we've done with partners as part of the coordination cell activity that we've undertaken, working with health, social care, third sector, housing association partners and others, we need to continue to work to reduce the impact of homelessness, but also what the response to coronavirus hasn't done is obviously deal with the fundamental issues that were leading people to become homeless in the first place. So what are the preventative measures that we now need to continue to put in place, and how do we transform our homelessness service to ensure that we as far as possible mitigate the revolving door that we've seen for a number of decades, quite frankly. So that's a big feature and a big area that I would think this committee will want to keep a very close eye on, in terms of how we're going to come out of the pandemic and how we're going to address this issue of moving people through the systems that we have, and how we best support them to prevent, as far as possible, homelessness occurring in the future. Moving on to priorities 8, 9 and 10. Clearly we've during this period of time, we understand that people's physical and mental health have been negatively impacted by the coronavirus. None more so, I suppose, than our residents who are currently in our sheltered housing accommodation, and some of our other older residents who would have been shielding, and more vulnerable residents who would have been shielding for quite a considerable amount of time. And I think one of the things that we need to do as the landlord, not necessarily just as the landlord, but in supporting our communities, our most vulnerable communities, is what part can we play in terms of addressing some of those physical and mental health issues. Later on, it talks around how we can look to use volunteering and other strategies as one of our priorities. So I think there's an important piece of work there for us as well. One of the other areas that we're aware of, and members will be acutely aware of, are tensions that have resulted as that have come about as a result of the pandemic. We've had fairly large-scale issues of antisocial behaviour in a number of our major towns, and I suppose it's how do we look to address those issues going forward. There's been some excellent partnership working over the last few months with the local authority and our Safer Vale team, coordinating a lot of that activity. And I think, again, the issues of social cohesion and some of the difficulties that have arisen as a result of lockdown measures has resulted in some areas where it would be, it would be necessary for us to work with those communities to bring them back to a certain extent, to bring them back together, whether that's at block level or a state level or wider community. And again, I've mentioned the in the earlier discussion about homelessness, about some of the preventative and early intervention support services, and an area there that we were very excited as a committee, if you remember, around the establishment of the drop-in hub in Houghton Road, which was due to open on April the 1st. It did open on April the 1st in that the building was occupied, but the issue around face-to-face contact has obviously caused us to rethink the model of how we support people in that way. The use of digital and how we blend that with a safe method of using face-to-face where necessary. But there's some important learning there about how we look to provide some of those preventative and early intervention services around that support model of the hub, and how we deal with the issue of the face-to-face. Moving on through the document now to page 48, under the theme of to work with and for our communities. Areas there that I would highlight are 16, 17 and 18. The financial impact of coronavirus. Now I've mentioned the ability of our housing business plan and our investment strategy around positively impacting, I suppose, businesses and SMEs and communities and training and those opportunities. But on the other hand, we also are aware that the potential closure of a lot of the economies that a number of our tenants would have been working in are not likely to be short term. Potentially a number of those businesses will not survive the next few months, and that is going to have a huge impact on our tenants. We know that approximately 70% of our tenants are on some form of income-related benefit. A number of those will be working either in zero-hour contracts or in low-income employment. But we also recognise that a number of our tenants, particularly our NEETs community and our younger communities, where are their opportunities for employment in the future? So again, I would suggest that there is an area of activity there that members may wish to consider as a key area going forward. 18 and 19, we're already doing some work on. This committee obviously has had oversight of our volunteering programme, our time banking programme, and the work with community groups. I think there's an area there that in terms of how we look at social enterprise and the impact potentially of social enterprise in a different way of working. And that's an area I think that we would want to focus on going forward. And finally, number 19, consulting with residents. We are about to undertake a consultation engagement exercise with our tenants under tenant profiling. What we identified from the work of Vale Heroes is that there is a substantial number of our tenants who are not currently impacting on statutory services. They may have needs, but they're not at the threshold for statutory intervention. But there's a potential that they will be in the future. And one of the things we need to understand, we need to better understand our tenants, their needs and their wishes if we are going to redefine the way that we provide our housing services or our supporting people services. So we're about to embark on that exercise shortly. We're looking to do that via telephone interview rather than previous methods some years ago where we sent out a questionnaire. The reason for that, we found that the telephone contact via Vale Heroes was a much more accessible means to have a conversation with people about some of the issues that they might not wish to divulge via a questionnaire, or we may pick up in terms of some of the discussions that we have with some of our residents. So that piece of work we're looking to commence fairly shortly. We're finalising the way that we actually put together the information that we receive, wanting to assure all residents that the information and discussion that we have is confidential, because I know that's always been a concern when we look at profiling, the term tenant profiling. But it gives us an opportunity to have conversations around some of their worries, anxieties and difficulties that might not otherwise come to the fore. So I'll stop there, hopefully highlighting some of the priorities in the way that I have will give you an opportunity to consider your work programme going forward. Any questions?
Thank you, Mike. First person that I can see is Councillor Jonathan Bird wants to ask a question.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for that. I was interested to hear that looking at alternative technologies to help our residents out with fuel poverty and stuff like that. And I was just wondering what experience, if any, we have had as a council of using alternative technologies, as you said, like ground source heat or whatever, because my experience with ground source heat, it works really, really well in modern, well-insulated properties that have underfloor heating. It doesn't work as well with conventional radiator type heating, and it's again, it's a totally different mindset as well. You need to use stuff like that because you don't get the high heat out of the radiators. It's more of a keeping a property at a continual heat, and obviously, you know, there's going to be a portion of education with users in that, and if it's a poorly insulated house, it's going to work out. It's not going to work out much cheaper, if any. So I just wondered what experience we had,
So the bid that we've made to Welsh Government have put together not only with the sort of fabric first approach, but also with some funding from their economy division. They've put together a programme of funding. The idea is clearly it's going to be far easier for us to, when we're building our new houses, to build in those measures that you've just mentioned. You know, so you know, starting from a potentially a factory build type approach, high levels of insulation, much more intuitive heating systems, etc., etc. So that's going to be much more easy for us to do. I think the big challenge is that most landlords obviously have a much older stock, as you mentioned. Most of ours is 30s and 40s build, post-war, which is going to be, as you say, difficult to get the gains that we would like to see, and certainly you won't get the same gains as you get from a new build. The programme is a series of pilots across the country using a different strategies in different areas. So we've been working with Welsh Government, all of the local authorities have been working with Welsh Government to identify certain types of properties, and the intention of the pilot is to try out different forms of new technology, to monitor that technology to see what the potential gains are or are not. Part of our bid is also about upskilling, because you're quite right. What does the department? We have no expertise within the department in relation to this technology. There are other partners out there that do have the expertise, and part of our bid is to commission that expertise to assist us in understanding the technology and what will work and what won't work. This is happening, as I say, will happen across Wales. So whilst we are looking at ground source heat pumps, there will be others looking at solar, there will be others looking at battery, there will be others looking at different retrofit, optimized retrofit opportunities on a fabric first approach. And on the back of that, bringing then all of that learning back together, the intention is to deliver a template of improvements for social housing stock, or for the existing stock, whether that be council housing or whether it be private housing, because obviously, you know, a lot of the private housing, pre and post-war private housing, is going to have the same issues. What it will do, as I say, is to give us an evidence base really of what works, what doesn't work. As part of our bid is also, there's an element there about training in the form of our tenants about how to use the technology, because as you say, You know, there's certain technologies, for example, which some of the passive air systems where rely on there being, you know, not having windows open necessarily and lots of drafts and things like that. But lots of tenants like to have their window open, you know, and that. So there are certain sort of endemic issues around some of the new technology and about its use. So it is also about sort of teaching us how we can best engage with our tenants to get the best benefit out of the technology we invest. So I wouldn't like to say that this is a one-size-fits-all approach. There will be different types of technology that will work on different types of buildings and different types of properties. And what they've tried to do is to look at the stock across Wales and try different technologies on different building types and then measure the impact and effect of those.
Thank you, Mike.
Mind if I
sorry.
have one come back on that?
Yeah, sure. And then it's Councillor Brooks then.
Thanks, Sandra. Just a quickie to follow that up, Mike. Are the housing associations involved? I guess they are in this because obviously they've got a hell of a lot of housing stock as well. And I know just from seeing it being built, there's now they're building a bungalow in Dyffryn and they're using battery power and photovoltaic units, solar heat. You know, it's a really interesting project. So I think, you know, this is something that I'm very interested in, and I think I'd be very keen to see how this develops over the next year or two.
Okay. Councillor Brooks, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's two parts to my question, Mike. The first part is obviously we're heading very rapidly towards the second wave, if not already in the thrall of it. So you mentioned earlier about there's 200 people in temporary accommodation. It's what sort of contingencies have you got as this second wave goes forward, and then over the winter as well, which we've already been forewarned that there are going to be further issues around COVID. So what sort of contingencies and sort of plans have you got afoot really to try and cope and to deal with that? You've already got 200 in. There's going to be more, to be realistic. And then also
We've lost
Sorry?
Mike. We've lost Mike.
We have.
Hi, Mike, can you hear us?
Can you hear
Sorry,
us?
I've just come back. Sorry, I think I lost my my internet for a second.
Okay, can you hear us now, Mike?
Yes, I can. I've turned my video off just in case that helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear what I said, Mike?
I didn't. The last that I unfortunately I heard was Jonathan's Councillor Bird's follow-up question was, are the RSLs involved? Yes, they are. The only other point I was going to mention in answer to the question is there is an understanding that in terms of gas and use of electricity, that there will be obviously network changes over the next 10 years that may well influence some of those gains. So there's some discussion, isn't there, with regard to natural gas and moving away from natural gas to other forms of heating. And also a lot of the RSLs are moving towards electric.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Bronwyn, did you want to ask your question again, and then it's Councillor Hanks after?
Please, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just saying, Mike, around you mentioned about we've got 200 people already in temporary accommodation, and what sort of contingency plans and looking ahead really, because obviously we're in the throes now of the second wave, which we don't know how that's actually going to pan out really. There's many predictions that the second wave is actually going to be worse than the first wave. So it's about how we're going to plan or forward plan around temporary accommodation, because situations are potentially going to get worse, and how we're going to deal with that. And then also it's around about, I suppose it links in with isolation and antisocial behaviour, I don't know how everybody else feels, but lots of people I've been talking to, and I've seen it with people myself in my own family, is this second wave is actually people are feeling quite down about it, quite despondent. You've got the dark nights, they're feeling a bit more despondent. They don't feel it's ever going to come to an end, and I think there's a real impact that's going to come out of this. So, and it's about what extra sort of support are we going to be able to give to people who are isolating and shielding, and then also that also links in then unfortunately with antisocial behaviours, is how we're going to support people around that. And also I know you'll be working with other agencies around that, but that really does, it really greatly concerns me.
I think in answer to your first question, as I say, in directing you towards, I suppose, activity for this scrutiny committee, I would suggest you may well want a report to discuss how we are going to respond to the homelessness issues that have arisen. Certain things that clearly are going to be key in terms of that response: new build. Other issues will be our allocation policy and whether we need to look at our allocation policy and how that works. Other areas will obviously be the phase 2 response. So in terms of some of the funding, capital funding that we've received from Welsh Government for modern methods of construction that we're looking to develop in the next 6 months. Part of it will be our existing, how we use our existing housing stock. We still haven't really moved away, even with the new build that the RSLs have been undertaking in the last 10 years. It hasn't kept pace with the number of single people that need our assistance and help. Bearing in mind that the vast majority, as you're aware, the vast majority of our accommodation is family sized or older persons. We have very little in the way of single persons accommodation at the moment. So one of the things we'll need to look at is to look about how we designate our stock. Will be an area for discussion. In the past, we have de-designated some one-bedroom units. One of the things we're going to have to consider, though, is that there were 60 units that we de-designated. And what I mean by that is that they were former older persons units meant for older persons. And we reduced the access age to those units to 40. So the idea being that you were a more mature single person and were less likely, I think, to cause concerns and issues. But when we look at virtually all of those that we've picked up in the last 6 months as additional need, nearly all of them are younger than 40. The average age is between 20, 35, 36. So we're going to have to consider, I think, in terms, again, our allocation and how we utilise our stock to meet the needs and the demands of. So these are all areas that I don't have the answers for you today, but these are the areas that we are starting to put together in some of the themes, and it may well be useful. Scrutiny may want to look at, say, a task and finish exercise, look at homelessness provision and the response to that as a piece of task and finish work. But as I say, that I really think that will be for members to have a think about. But that seems a very key and interesting area that members would be very keen to be involved with, I think. In terms of your second point around people who are shielding, some of the issues that we've seen in terms of some of the community cohesion issues, what we saw, I think, initially through the initial phases was we didn't know an awful lot of our people that were shielding, and the work of the Vale Heroes team and the work of community agencies as well, and the third sector, as I say, is identified not just for council housing but the wider community, a number of people who need support in whether it's low-level support or what have you. from a housing perspective, that will lead me then to look at the way that we use our supporting people service and whether that needs to flex and to change. Clearly, we're dealing with lots of people who have housing related issues, you know, whether they be mental health, whether they be drug and alcohol issues, whether they be social isolation, or whatever they may be. And I think we will need to review how we use our supporting people funding to best support these people going forward. The work that we will do with our tenant profiling may lead us to have to look at the way that my service is structured to be able to have the capacity to be able to better support non-traditional, what people would say was non-traditional landlord activity. We have the money advice team, which is doing fantastic work on the one end, but how do we then link that in with our supporting people team to make sure that we are picking up these areas of social isolation and particularly those vulnerable people. And the tenant profiling work that we do will be key, I think, in terms of understanding what the need is and what people want from that.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so I think Sally Hanks, you're next. Andrew Parker, did you want to ask a question as well? I don't, if you had your hand up previously. Oh, he's muted. You're muted, Andrew. I've got Sally's next, and then Andrew, did you want to ask a question after Sally? You're still muted. Oh, Sally, if you'd like to ask your question, and then I'll come back to Andrew.
Okay.
And just to say that Marcus is now with us, so if we want to talk any questions around regeneration, we'll be able to ask Marcus. And I don't know whether he wants to say anything before we ask questions as well. Okay, Sally, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Mike, I was just wanting to talk about the survey. I thought the staff survey you sent out was a very caring survey. I wondered if you were disappointed with only a 44% return on that, and I wondered what were the dates of which that happened. And I also wondered if IT has improved, as that seemed to be outstanding as the #1. Can you hear me, Mike?
Yes, I can, yes.
Sorry, I thought you looked frozen. I wondered if the IT had improved somewhat for staff. And also, some time ago, we had a presentation on Care First, and I just wondered if the Vale was that still up and running, and was that being used to the full potential?
Okay. In terms of the staff wellbeing survey that your first question mentions, 44%, I think within the body of the report, I can't remember the figure now, but I think our previous staff survey was around 50%. So it was there or thereabouts in terms of previous staff surveys that we've undertaken. So I think it is also important to note that the vast majority of returners tended to be office-based staff rather than frontline, and I think that's a challenge that's always been there about how we engage with, how we engage with frontline. You know, how do we engage? How do we get the views of our, our building cleaners, our refuse workers, and what have you? And it's not easy. It is a challenge to try and engage and to understand what those needs are. But no, I think in terms of we were relatively pleased with the response. And I suppose the key themes that were coming out of that. So a lot there in terms of, and we've already started a lot of work in terms of supporting the staff about how can we better develop those support arrangements to keep our Councillor Brooks mentioned around some of the issues that the residents were facing. I'm sure, and we know, and I know from my own experience, that our own staff are feeling the same anxieties and pressures, and how do we support those people? And that's about how do we engage, how do I engage, and how do my senior management team engage with with our staff. So we're already working in a number of those areas. Your second point about IT, yes, there has been significant investment in IT, in infrastructure. Although you lost me for a few moments, that wasn't down to the council's infrastructure. That was unfortunately probably down to my internet connectivity and everyone coming up from work. But generally, I would say that in terms of productivity and the ability to communicate and engage, that has vastly improved over the last few months, certainly from my experience. What we haven't had the opportunity, however, as directorates and divisions and sections, is the investment that's required to support things like the digital transformation work that we need to do, and some of that learning that has come out of the last 6 months. So from a housing perspective, we know that, for example, I need a new housing management system. We haven't looked at that for the last 6 months because really it wasn't a key priority. We have now started to do that. We've now engaged with a specialist, and we will be looking to procure that work in the next few months, pending obviously where we are over the coming months. But the technology that allows us to use digital for in terms of our customers, more agile working, is still a great deal of work to be done. And that investment, you know, we have the resources within our business plan to invest in that technology. It's just that it hasn't been something that we've been able to concentrate on, I don't suppose, as we've dealt with more pressing priorities. In terms of your last point, Care First, I can't remember the presentation. Can you remember? Could you expand a little bit? I can't recall the presentation.
Yeah, I think it was in community liaison. There was a big discussion about Care First, which was a counselling service and a telephone support service for staff for wellbeing issues.
Right. Okay. So the Care First approach obviously is the council's, as you say, the council's response to supporting our staff. That is led by our Tracy Dickinson, our head of HR. That work has been expanded during the last few months. Care First is still in operation, and also we've been, you know, some of the things that have happened is that, you know, people would have access to more sessions because some of the issues that people are feeling in terms of some of their anxiety, issues around anxiety, depression, you know, stress, a lot of those factors have come to the fore. So whereas potentially, you know, we would have dealt with those, or Care First would have dealt with those over, say, 2 or 3 sessions, perhaps, depending on what they've determined is necessary. What they're actually seeing is that those sessions are tending to take much longer. You know, more sessions are required given the nature of the stresses that some of the staff are feeling. So yeah, Care First is still there, it's still operating, and the council is continuing to invest in it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Parker, if you wanted to ask your question, hopefully we'll be able to hear you. Councillor Parker, we can't hear you at the moment. Are you unmuted? Oh, do you have headphones plugged in at all, Councillor Parker? Because sometimes that doesn't help with the sound. If you wanted to type your question in, I can ask it for you if you like. If you want to send me a chat message. Marcus, did you want to say anything while we're waiting for Councillor Parker's question? You're on mute too.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I've just sent Councillor Parker a message to unmute himself. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. Marcus, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Marcus.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Sorry, it's something to do with my headphones, I think. No, I didn't have anything really to add, just to sort of say hello to everyone, and sorry I'm late. One thing I was just going to say in respect of Mike's answer on the issues around staff and obviously staff wellbeing. I attended a meeting on Tuesday, our regular, what we call, what used to be called CMT, I think they've changed the name of it now to SLT, but it was the corporate management team meeting. And obviously staff wellbeing is very much at the top of the agenda. And one thing I'd add is obviously the likely or possible changes that could occur possibly towards the end of this week with talk of a circuit breaker and obviously a further lockdown is very much at the heart of what the management team is looking at, and all staff right across the council and indeed councillors and tenants and customers will be very much in our thoughts, and we'll be looking to make sure that we can do all we can if we do have a period where we may have a shutdown for some weeks again. So it's very much in terms of the council's corporate management team at the heart of what they're thinking about at the moment. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah. Chair.
Yes.
Marcus may be able to add a little bit to the discussion we were having around how the economic support that we're giving businesses and communities. I mentioned earlier about the investment activity of the council and how that is, we're looking at the way that can best, the Vale pound is being spent in the Vale. I know that one of Marcus's colleagues at the moment is convening a stakeholder group, a working group to look at foundational economy, and that may have been, as I say, I skirted over that a little bit because Marcus is clearly more of a on the pulse in terms of the business support that we're giving businesses at the moment, which may come under some of the work that this committee looks at.
Sorry, bear with me. Yes, Marcus, if you want to do that, and then I've got Councillor Rachel Nugent-Finn would like to ask a question after that. But Marcus, if you'd like to go into that, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll keep it relatively brief. Obviously, there's a lot of things to cover. Yes, obviously we're awarded funding via Welsh Government to study the foundational economy. We have a member of staff who is looking very much at that at the moment, looking at, for example, things like how we award contracts as a council and the process around that, so that we can ensure that local businesses can be involved in that process, because a lot of businesses are either unwilling or nervous or just find the whole process too complicated to actually bid for. Mike will have found this problem when we do things like housing renewal and when we do have large-scale repairs to our own housing properties on our own buildings, for example. It's increasingly difficult to get local businesses to bid for that work. And indeed, for other bits of work where we are putting out, as a council, we put out millions of pounds worth of contracts. So it's really important that local businesses can be involved in that. And Maddie, who is the lady who works for me, who's doing that work, is very much at the forefront in trying to ensure that when we have a contract process, that process for both bidding for contracts and for actually advertising and letting them allows businesses who are local to the Vale to access and to bid for it. So, and it goes wider than that. Obviously, it includes things like community groups as well, because social enterprises are quite capable of bidding for some of these pieces of work. So it's ensuring that the Vale as a community and as a business base is able to benefit from the millions of pounds worth of contracts which we as a council let, but also which some of our partners are letting as well. So that's really important work, as Mike has said. The other part of what's going on at the moment obviously is around town centres and making sure that people feel comfortable to go into town centres, and perhaps some of the short-term but quick measures we can implement to make those town centres more attractive for shoppers, but also to make sure that businesses, especially hospitality businesses, can have space available to operate and to run their businesses in a safe way. This doesn't mean, obviously, in most cases, allowing people to basically eat and drink outside, but it also involves things like decluttering pavements. So where we've got pavements with lots of bins, or even cycle storage in the wrong place, which is cluttering up the pavement and means that people can't move around safely. We're looking at all of that, and that work is currently underway, and we're consulting all the town centre councillors who are involved so that they can see how that work is progressing. We need to implement that and have it the money spent by the end of this financial year, so by March next year, which is no mean feat given where we are. So and then the final bit of work, just to mention, it is around grants, which some of the grants now are being awarded again. So we've had a whole tranche of grants awarded via the last lockdown, and colleagues were involved in ensuring that that money got to businesses that needed it. It was nearly £28 million worth of funding was allocated to businesses through a combination of colleagues in council tax and our regeneration team. That was a really big piece of work and very successful. We are now looking to run this programme again with much smaller sums of money. Welsh Government have made £1,000 available to all businesses who have to show that they've been affected by the current situation. £1,000 and £1,500 depends on the size of your business and the size of your property. So we are looking again at how we can get that money to the businesses. That will open on the 26th of October, subject to the Vale still being in lockdown. So there's a lot of work ongoing around supporting businesses. So a bit of a quick fly through there. Hopefully that's okay.
Marcus, yes, that was really interesting what you had to say, and I think it sort of helped to round off what Mike had introduced previously as well. So, Councillor Nugent-Finn, did you want to ask a question?
I did. Thank you very much, Chair. Mike, going back to the first part of the presentation, section 0.5, which is working with key businesses to support employment, skills and development. I put a question to full council actually, is about the Kickstart grant. I feel this is an opportunity where we can do exactly this. It's about partnership working. It's about, there's you know, obviously there's criteria to it. It's aimed at younger people, but I feel that fits in perfectly with the aims here. You can work with, I think it's 30 different providers, but a local authority and a town council are one of the key main instigators of this project. And I also thought, going off the back of last committee, we could fit this in with the CCTV monitoring. There's a huge scope here, an opportunity to engage young people and to train them alongside our staff. And if we certainly take over the contract, and the suggestion of working with the police, where we could get young people, you know, within, you know, so that the criteria is it needs to be a new enterprise. This slots into that perfectly. So a lot of food for thought there, Mike, but it's a central government, but it's going to be drawn down to Welsh Government and then to the local authorities. So I really would like to look at that and take some advantage of that. 19 then as well, going on to your second presentation, is to involve and engage consult residents and redesigning services. I think you said that you're going to do like a telephone approach, which is great, but it's not always going to connect with everybody. So I just, again, perhaps I'm not sure how that's going to look, Mike, and I don't envy you the task of having to do that, and I will think about it and perhaps come up with some suggestions. But as you said, then people are going to be disclosing anxiety problems, etc. How are we going to deal with that? There's a huge risk to that, where people are disclosing quite confidential information. I would like to think that we're going to be working really closely with supporting people. And lastly, the process with regards to the businesses becoming part of the bidding plan. I've spoken to Annette G recently. Marcus, I don't know who you referred to. Was it Hannah? I've made a note. Is it Hannah?
Maddie.
Maddie. I haven't spoken to Maddie. I've only spoken to Annette G, but I'm sort of inundated with smaller businesses. One in particular Skyhawk, who are just desperate to get some conversation going with you all about supplying green, very green, eco-friendly cleaner products, during this difficult time. So I've been alluded to the fact that there's maybe some sort of steering group being set up. If that's the case, I'd like to be part of that as well.
Okay.
And
So can you
lastly,
just do your questions, so that, because I think we're losing track of what the questions are. So can you ask Mike his questions?
It's more for noting, Chair. So it's more for noting.
Can you just ask Mike his questions, and then so that he knows what he's answering, because I think we're losing track of what your questions actually are.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up, isn't it, with me? I guess so. So it was to do with number 5, which was working with key businesses to support employment and skills and development. Are we going to take advantage and work with the Kickstart grant? It's a central government initiative, but it can be rolled out with local authorities. It fits perfect. 19 was regards. Do you want me to carry on?
Yes, that's the next one, so we know what the questions are.
19 was the involvement, engagement, consultation. Again, just how is this going to look? I really respect the fact that it's going to be very difficult, Mike, but I think there just needs to be a little bit more thought around how we're going to engage with the most difficult and the most vulnerable tenants. That's always been my concern. And then the disclosures, how we deal with that for both our staff and the tenants.
Thank you. And then, did you have a question for Marcus then as well, or have you asked the question for Marcus?
I have. I think, Marcus, did you note that okay, or shall I repeat it? Thank you.
Okay, all right then.
And last but not least, I've got one more, Chair.
Okay.
If I may, thank
you.
Go ahead. We talked about the digital divide. When I was chairing the last scrutiny, we set up a presentation from Innovate Trust about their new digital houses. So perhaps we'd like to have that presentation at this committee, Chair, because it fits in again with the strategies that we're looking at with regards to how our housing is going to look. Just a thought, but it's an excellent presentation. Everything from tenants using an Alexa to solar power panel, absolutely everything. It's a very, very good service. You might want to consider it.
Thank you. Is that something that you discussed previously, Mike, with us, with the Innovate Trust as well?
Yeah, could I just direct members?
I thought you had
the council are using ICF, Integrated Care Fund, to develop its own smart house. It's being led by colleagues in social services, and that piece of it needs some of the building work undertaken, and then obviously the technology, which Councillor Nugent Finn has just mentioned, is being installed as well. So yeah, the smart house, we're developing our own smart house. So I think probably Scrutiny would want to go and have a look at that and the opportunities that it gives, particularly with people with learning needs and assisted learning, and how that can help improve the quality of life for individuals. In terms of question one, I think it would, in terms of question one, which is around community development and around how we look to ensure that people do have the opportunities in terms of employment and whatever, that's bread and butter work with regard to our community development team. And Shani Pater within the team leads on that activity. Members may well like to see a report going forward in terms of the work that we've already done and our strategy for going forward. In terms of working and utilising the grant scheme, our organisational development team are widely communicating that scheme to across the council, with opportunities obviously for younger people as part of the scheme. Obviously the funding is coming, a lot of funding is coming via the scheme, and again, community development will be looking at those opportunities around how we can bring in additional funding as well. So I'd welcome an opportunity in the future to bring a report on the community development activity that we're doing and the value of that. In terms of the targeted approach, yes, I mean the telephone survey, that's a one-on-one engagement session with the tenant. Happy to have a conversation with Councillor Nugent Finn if she has some ideas about how that can work, and we can have a conversation about that outside the meeting. One of the things I think in terms of our community groups and our residents groups. I know Heather's on the meeting today. I think one of the impacts that we've seen that we haven't sort of worked through yet is the impact on those working groups that have been established over the years, and the impact that we've had in terms of not doing face-to-face and some of those meetings and some of the technological challenges that some of our residents engaged in those groups are facing. Now, one of the things that we did, we cancelled obviously the summer festival event early on in the pandemic because we didn't think we would be going ahead, and as it happens, we wouldn't have been going ahead with it. But in discussions with the tenant engagement team there, we looked to transfer and utilise some of that funding to purchase and to provide equipment for some of our residents groups that didn't have access to the technology. But I think there's a bigger issue there in terms of how do we engage going forward. You will be receiving in your new work, in the work programme for this year, a report on a new tenant engagement strategy. The existing strategy has come to an end, and you will have a follow-up report on the 4 main strategies that you were monitoring last year and the year before. You'll have that follow-up report probably for your November committee, but then we will also discuss the fact that we need to evolve and develop a new tenant engagement strategy. So at some stage then in the new year, we will come forward with some ideas around how that may look, and I'm very happy to have conversations with individual members outside the meeting about what they might like to see in that. In terms of the final final element, I think Marcus may, in terms of the business bidding, I'm not sure if Marcus is still on the call or he's had to go.
I am here. No, sorry, I turned the camera off, that's all.
I think there was the question with the business, I think.
Yeah, okay, I'll turn the camera on. It did tell me it was breaking up, so just before I come back on 2 things. The Kickstarter, which I don't know, Mike, you broke up on my feed, so I'm not sure if you responded to that, but just for Councillor Nugent, Finn, just to advise that Kickstarter has been picked up by the council. We are looking to implement it both internally and externally. So in terms of internally, we have to get up to 30, or we had to get 30 people at least. And we have, I think the last time I spoke to Tracy from HR, there was over 66 placements that have been identified within the council, which is excellent. I think they're across various fields. I know we've got 5 or 6 in regen. I think Mike has got some in housing as well, and there are others across the council. So that's internally, that's been accessed. But we are also working with colleagues in HR, education and regen to develop the council as a provider of Kickstarter to businesses in the Vale too. So just to explain that, what we would do is we would try and find a minimum of 30 placements across businesses throughout the Vale. Then we would obviously work to find the younger people who could access those placements. So we're like an access channel into those pieces of employment. So we're doing that now. We are working up how we can achieve that, and colleagues are actively involved in that process. Just to let you know that. Sorry. Now the other part I'm just trying to think was, I'm sorry, Councillor Nugent, can you refresh my mind about the businesses, what it was?
I can, yes. I've been speaking to Annette G about how we,
yes.
so how we sort of engage with, when you put out the bidding and with these huge conglomerates, how they then disseminate them to our smaller local businesses who sort of just want a piece of the pie, really. I've spoken to Annette, but not Maddie, and she did explain that there's possibly going to be a steering group made up of some elected members and obviously some staff and public. And I'd like to be part of that if possible as well, please, Marcus.
Okay.
And thank you very much for the clarification of Kickstart. That is absolutely wonderful. It's great to hear that. So thank you for that.
No problem, Councillor. Just to let you know, I don't know why I've forgotten that because I was emailing Maddie as we were speaking, but Madeline Sims is Maddie's name. I've asked Maddie to give you a full, to send you a full breakdown of what the work is we've done so far. And if she can involve you, she will. So she'll send you a breakdown of where we've got to and explain, you know, what stage we're at with that work. So hopefully you'll have that going forward. I think that was everything.
Okay, I think the rest of the committee might be interested in knowing where we've got with that work as well, Marcus.
What I think possibly, yeah, no problem. What I think we'll be doing, we can I think it's due to be reported eventually to the E&R scrutiny, but there's no reason why we couldn't, if we're doing a report to E&R, we couldn't bring a report back to housing as well. So I'll suggest that there's that when the report comes, it comes back to both sets. So you know you'll get a full briefing then of what's happened, if that's okay.
Yeah, yes, that would be great. I've also got Councillor Liz Burnett would like to speak as well. So if you'd like to go ahead, please, Councillor Burnett.
Good evening. I hadn't intended speaking this evening, but these are actually two of my absolute passions, so I thought I would add a little bit extra in. In terms of the Kickstart programme, I answered a question at full council. So that's my answer is actually available on the webcast of that. And we are really committed to making these worthwhile positions. You know, I mean, historically, when you've had sort of like job creation schemes, it's been flipping burgers and that sort of thing. I'm really, really pleased that officers have looked into exactly how young people that participate in this will have some really, really valuable skills and knowledge to go forward with at the end of it, maybe even finding a permanent job within the council. So I think I saw some data through the other day that in the Vale, we've now got 1,800 16 to 24-year-olds that are on universal credit. That's dreadful. I mean, it's really, really worrying. So we have to do whatever we can on that. And I'm really, really pleased at what officers have pulled together on that. In terms of the work to do with foundation economy, this is a small project that we've had funded by Welsh Government. We managed to get some funding to build on the colossal work that has been done in terms of 21st century schools, where we have normally trebled or quadrupled our targets on community benefits for the 21st century schools programme. And we're looking to take the good practice from that through into both, you know, housing, road maintenance, social care, etc., and look at how we can increase the number of subcontractors, etc., people that are contracting with the council, and how much of our procurement spend goes into the local economy, because particularly at the moment that is hugely important for local businesses, that they are actually contracting with the council. If I'm not mistaken, recently with Pencoitra High School, about 80% of the contracts they gave out were from the local postcode, which is absolutely brilliant. And we are currently advertising some new contracts and trying to encourage local businesses to participate. The contractors work with those local businesses to help them to get upskills so that they can put in successful tenders. I think it would be something really interesting for this committee to know more about, and the whole field of community benefits. So if you would like the yes. 21st century school programme to actually talk to you about community benefits, what we've delivered in one part of our work and what we would really love to be delivering, I know Mike's really on board with this as well and his team, what we would really love to deliver right across the council in terms of opportunities for local businesses and local residents. And my favourite one recently, just to finish, was the woman career changer that we've lost her as a carer, but she's actually now getting her qualifications working on our schools programmes on heavy plant, and she's actually doing groundworks. So no, a bit more of that would be absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Councillor Burnett. Yes, I think we would be interested in learning more about community benefits. My sort of small time working for a housing association, I sort of learned a little bit about community benefits and how, you know, they can take on the companies that do the work for us, building houses or whatever, can actually take on perhaps apprentices and things like that, which I think is really important to the local community. So any information that we can have around community benefits, I think would be really good for this committee as well. Did anybody else want to ask any other questions? Sally Hanks, if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, Mike. Universal credit, nationally, there must be huge pressure. Is it still 4 weeks turnaround, and are people still getting that credit within the 4 weeks that it's supposed to be? Thanks.
Yes, there is still the issue of delay, but obviously, you know, processes have improved. The issue for us that I refer to in terms of rent income, it's compounded by the fact that a large number of our tenants, as I say, will not have the opportunity of work going forward, particularly if they are operating under some of the zero hours contracts and some of the leisure and entertainment, you know, businesses that operate in the Vale. The impact in stark terms, our rent arrears have increased substantially in the last 6 months. They now stand at around £500,000, which, you know, it is still allowing our business plan, our housing business plan, our investment plan to remain sustainable. But clearly, the work that we need to do to support, and going back to the point of business, you know, about training opportunities, employment opportunities, that sort of non-traditional landlord role is an area that we will need to focus on going forward to support our tenants in that regard. So it is an issue. The government have invested larger amounts of money into universal credit to deal with issues around the pandemic. We're continuing to provide support together with, obviously, colleagues, primarily, I suppose, in Citizens Advice, who are providing direct support to all residents of the Vale. They've seen a fantastic increase in their contacts. As I mentioned, I think it probably is worthy of this committee at some stage having a report with regard to the financial impact on our tenants as we get to understand that more, the impact in terms of our business as a housing business, and more importantly, what work are we going to do to support our tenants to ensure that they are able to pay their rent and are able to obviously move forward in terms of training and employment opportunities.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So the delay is only 4 weeks. I was thinking of the people claiming that they weren't waiting 5 or 6 weeks. It is being turned around within the 4 weeks. Once they claim, it's only a waiting period of 4 weeks.
The waiting period is much better than it was. It's not such an issue. Obviously, people can obviously receive an advance as well. The issue that we have is not really now, I don't think, necessarily about how people claim and the delays in claiming. A lot of the issues that we have at the moment is that obviously a number of people on universal credit will be receiving their housing costs direct as part of their rounded up payment, and not necessarily prioritising their rent because of competing financial pressures elsewhere. So I think that's the area that we have to concentrate, that we are concentrating on. Yes, we can use things like direct payment, look at direct payments and look at APAs to assist in obviously those payments and paying off the arrears. But some of those arrears are going to be long standing. It will take, you know, we have some of our tenants who are a few £1,000s in arrears, and you know, in the best will in the world, it's going to take a very long time for those tenants necessarily to get back on track. So it's about understanding, you know, with the money advice team doing the financial assessments that we do, providing the advice and the guidance, and obviously at the moment the evictions are not permissible at the moment. Well, no, evictions are now permissible, but there is now a 6-month notice period that the government introduced, that tenants have to be given 6 months notice in regard to any possession proceedings. This authority is determined that we won't be evicting anyone during the pandemic, and all RSLs and all other social landlords have given an equal commitment, other than antisocial behaviour, which obviously you know, is something that obviously that 6-month notice period doesn't apply to. But yeah, I think we have to recognise the issues for us isn't necessarily around the processes necessarily around universal credit now. It's about people sort of not paying at the moment and working with those people to get them into the routine of paying again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Is that all the questions that we have for this evening? Yes. If we can move through what recommendations we have, because sort of the recommendation that this goes back to Cabinet. I think we're happy with the report that's come forward, but we've got quite a lot of reports and things like that we've picked up this evening that we might want to take to our future programme for the committee. Are you happy for me to go through those? So what I have so far is that perhaps we'd like a report on the capital programme, particularly around the pilot from Welsh Government, the ground source heating things, was that, I think was one of them. Also around the housing investment programme, we'd like to have something around that. I'm sure we have that already. Number 8 was the homelessness, a report about how we're going to tackle the homelessness policy, but there was also a suggestion from Mike for the task and finish group around, you know, sort of looking into that, if people would be interested in being part of a task and finish group, to look at how we're going to tackle that and to report back to the committee. Do people want to vote on them singly, or do you want to do it en bloc at the end and perhaps come back to the task and finish group and who's going to fill it? I'm happy for suggestions. If anybody wants to speak. Yes, I'll go through it then, yeah? Okay, I'll just carry on speaking. Okay, so we also had something on vulnerable communities and the antisocial behaviour. I don't know whether we wanted a report around that. Also looking at how the hub on Halton Road is working and what would happen with the face-to-face sort of interaction, but we're now having to do stuff online. A report has already been done on the younger people, the community development and younger people. We've already got a report on that we might want to look at. Look at the social enterprise and different ways of working. Did we want to look at that? Okay, and sorry, I've also got a report from the 21st Century Schools and the community benefits. A report on the financial impact of universal credit on tenants. And a visit to the smart house, or a look at what's happening with the smart house. I think that is everything. I think Mark Thomas was going to help me as well, but if anybody else can think of anything. Councillor Bronwyn Brooks.
Just a little bit of a concern. We've got an awful lot there. That's going to be a lot of reports. and obviously this is a very changing situation at the moment. And also some of those reports are actually cross-cutting with other committees. So really it's a bit of a plea to sort of to draw in really what our committee is actually structured for. So I think we need to, because I just got a feeling we could end up with too many reports. And as I said, some of these are actually very relevant for other committees. So I don't want to cross-cut over theirs where they might actually be doing pieces of work around it as well. So.
Yes, Councillor Brooks, I'll take that on board. I'm happy with that. I didn't want to miss out any of the reports that have been talked about this evening, but yes, I think it definitely something that is relevant to this committee. Perhaps we could just have oversight of perhaps reports that are already at other committees rather than actually doing a piece of work around anything as well. Would be better, and I'll take officers' direction on that as well. Marcus, if you wanted to speak.
Yes, it was just really quickly to say, for example, the foundational economy work, that would probably be better as a presentation than necessarily a report. So some of these things perhaps can be picked up by presentations, which could be made to, if it cuts across a couple of scrutiny committees, it wouldn't be an issue really to present the same presentation to both scrutiny committees. Just a thought on that.
Yes, I'm more than happy for that to you know, for us to have a presentation rather than, you know, sort of start trying to do work outside of our remit really. So yes, that would be helpful, and obviously I'll take officers' recommendations on those as well. Mike, if you'd like to speak now.
You mentioned universal credit, and on the same theme, Scrutiny Committee, Corporate Resources is the lead committee to consider impacts of welfare reform, including universal credit. I think the area that might that's me, but
people can make sure they're muted, getting a bit of feedback.
Hi, Mike. Oh, I'm probably really low, aren't I?
yeah, I
Hi,
can
Mike. If you want to try again. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the point I was making and echoing Councillor Brooks's and Marcus's comments, that area is actually the responsibility of corporate resources, and I know that reports, and we feed into the report that goes to corporate resources in relation to welfare reform and including universal credit. I was thinking mainly around our activity around rent recovery and supporting tenants in terms of maximising income, rather than a wider welfare reform or universal credit might be something that I certainly have not brought that report, I don't think, in the past to this committee. And it may well bring in some of the other aspects around some of the employment opportunities and development opportunities. So it may well be one report on what do we do to support our what are we doing to support our tenants financially, economically, and in terms of community development.
Okay. Yes, that's good. Thank you very much. So are we happy to go with the recommendations that we have for this evening? I've spoken about quite a few there. Go for presentations where it's you know, we're interested in it, but it isn't for us to sort of make any recommendations. is committee happy for to go forward with that future programme? Yes, yes. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So I think that is the end of this this meeting. Thank you very much for making it a really interesting meeting, for asking all those questions. Thank you, Mike and Marcus, for coming along and keeping us up to date. I'm sure by tomorrow it will have all changed as well. So by the next meeting we'll have more information, which is good. But yes, thank you for coming and making it interesting. The next meeting, online meeting, is scheduled for Wednesday, the 11th of November. So yeah, if everyone, please stay safe and stay well. Okay, thank you for coming this evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.